Religion has always been a complicated subject for many people, but for me and my husband Daniel, it was never a problem. We found a welcoming church with a progressive pastor and a community that, at least in theory, preached love of neighbor. But of course, there's always that one person who thinks they've been chosen by God to oversee the lives of others. I'd noticed them before. She always sat on the same bench with that expression of someone who had swallowed a lemon and still had to smile. As we passed, she looked at us as if we were invading sacred territory. It was already clear that we weren't welcome in her private universe. At first, I ignored it. People like that come and go, and I wasn't there to convince her of anything. But one Sunday, right after the service, she decided that she simply couldn't live without teaching me a lesson. We were talking to some friends, laughing about something completely random, when I felt that usual look burning the back of my neck. I turned around and there she was, full of purpose, marching towards us as if she were about to announce the apocalypse.
How long have you been attending this church?
The question came dryly, without an introduction, without a good morning, without anything. I felt my husband tensing his shoulder next to me, already anticipating that this wasn't going to end well. "A couple of years," I replied, not really caring. She sighed, crossed her arms, and frowned dramatically. I already knew what was coming.
So, you know that this isn't a church for that kind of thing, right?
I could pretend I didn't understand. I could smile and lecture you about respect, love, and acceptance. But honestly, I was curious to see how far she'd go. "What kind of thing?" She gave me a fake smile, the kind that precedes an insult disguised as advice.
Your relationship. The Bible is very clear about this, and I don't think it's right for you to bring this lifestyle into the house of God.
Ah, here we go. The old, "I'm not prejudiced, but" card. I took a deep breath, feeling Daniel squeeze my hand in a silent plea not to start a fight right then and there. But I wasn't going to shout or cause a scene. I had another plan. I glanced at the pastor, who was standing nearby, talking to a group of worshipers. "Pastor, come here a minute." The woman paled instantly, and that's when things started to turn against her. If there's one thing certain people don't expect, it's for their arrogance to have immediate consequences. The woman barely had time to process my words before she saw the pastor approaching. She tried to disguise her discomfort by straightening her posture, as if she was suddenly about to be named a saint. But I saw the slight tremor in her hand when he finally stopped beside us with his usual friendly smile. "What is it, my son?" asked the pastor, looking at me. I could feel Daniel holding back his laughter beside me. He knew that I had planned this response in the most theatrical way possible. "The sister here was explaining to us that our presence might not be welcome in the church," I replied, trying my best to look genuinely confused. It was as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over her. The woman's face turned red instantly, and I saw her eyes widen for a second. She hadn't expected me to throw the responsibility for her words straight into the pastor's lap. She sniffled and tried to smooth it over.
Well, I just meant that not everyone here thinks it's appropriate.
Cowardice. She turned her argument around in less than 5 seconds. The pastor was silent for a moment, analyzing the situation. Then he crossed his arms and, with an almost debauched calm, asked, "And who exactly decided that?" The woman opened and closed her mouth like a fish out of water. If before she had been red with anger, now she was red with pure discomfort.
Well, some people, you know.
The pastor smiled slightly and shook his head. "You know, sister, I often find it funny when someone uses the Bible to justify personal prejudices, because, as far as I know, Jesus' main teaching is love. But it seems that some people make a point of forgetting that, when it doesn't fit with what they want to believe. If I said I held back my laughter, I'd be lying. I was savoring that moment. The woman, on the other hand, was clearly struggling to keep her composure, but she still wasn't going to admit defeat so easily.
"But Pastor, this is against the scriptures."
"Against which scriptures?" he interrupted, without losing patience. "Because if we were to follow them all to the letter, there's a lot that the believers themselves do today that would be condemned too. But nobody wants to talk about that, do they?" And that's when I saw the exact moment when she realized she had lost. She took a step back, shaking her head as if disappointed in her own pastor. Because, of course, if his opinion didn't match hers, then he could only be wrong.
"I only wanted what was best for our church."
She mumbled in a pathetic attempt to look like the victim, and then, without looking at anyone else, she turned and marched off as if she had just been betrayed by her own faith. The pastor looked at us and sighed. People like that don't come to worship, they come to judge, and that, my son, has nothing divine about it. I smiled and shook my head, but I knew she hadn't given up yet, because certain types of people don't know how to lose without trying to take others with them. And I was about to find out just how far she was willing to go. If the story had ended there, it would have been almost poetic. The woman tried to throw us out of the church, got verbally slapped by the pastor, and left with her tail between her legs. The end. But, of course, some people don't know how to lose with dignity. 2 days after the service, Daniel sent me a message at work. "You won't believe what this woman has done." As a good veteran of bullshit, I knew shit was coming, but nothing prepared me for her level of insanity. I got home, and Daniel showed me a screenshot of a church WhatsApp group, and there she was, trying to turn her own failure into a moral crusade. The message began with that dramatic tone of people who think they're starring in a biblical soap opera. "Brothers and sisters, I need to share my concern. Our church, which has always been a refuge for the Word of God, is being infiltrated by ideologies that go against sacred teachings." She actually used the word infiltrated, as if we were spies sent by Satan to wipe out the church's wafer supply. But it didn't stop there. She basically insinuated that the pastor was being corrupted by people with an agenda, read us, and that the church needed to unite to recover the morality of the Holy Temple. Translation: she wanted us thrown out. I laughed nervously, because it was one thing for her to be a gossip with no life of her own. It was another thing to try to raise a medieval riot against me and my husband. "I'm going to put an end to this now," I said to Daniel, reaching for my cell phone, but he held me back. "Calm down, we'll sort this out the right way." And really, I'm glad I listened, because the way he resolved the situation was much better than I imagined. The following Sunday, we arrived at the church earlier than usual, and guess what? The woman was there, and she looked pleased, as if she thought she had convinced half the congregation that we were sent from the devil. Only she didn't know what was coming. If that woman thought she was going to bring us down with half a dozen dramatic WhatsApp messages, she was about to learn an important lesson. He who plants gossip reaps public shame. We arrived at the church before the service started. Some of the faithful were already there, chatting, and you could tell that the atmosphere was different. Normally, we were greeted with smiles and handshakes, but that day there was a certain heaviness in the air. Some people looked at us curiously, others whispered among themselves. The woman was sitting at the front, as always, with a disgusting air of satisfaction. It was obvious that she thought she had achieved something, but what she didn't know was that the pastor himself had discovered her plan. When he entered the altar to begin the service, the first thing he did wasn't open the Bible or begin with a prayer. He took the microphone and, with a serious look on his face, dropped the bombshell. "Before we begin, I'd like to address a matter that came to me this week." The woman immediately tensed in her seat. "Someone has been spreading messages among the faithful, suggesting that some people are not welcome here," the pastor continued, pausing to look directly at her. I was very disappointed to see that, instead of promoting love and unity, this person had chosen the path of gossip and division. The silence in the hall was deafening. The woman began to move her hands in her lap, uncomfortable. She knew it was about her. The pastor then looked at everyone present and asked, "Does anyone here feel entitled to decide who can and cannot worship God?" No one answered, not even her, who until a few minutes ago had been full of opinions. And then came the part that really destroyed any chance of her coming out on top. The pastor took out his cell phone and opened the church's WhatsApp group. Let's read some of these messages, since they were written with such certainty. And then he began to read them out loud. Each venomous and prejudiced word echoed in the hall like a slap in the face to the author. People murmured, some shocked, others visibly ashamed of having believed her. The woman turned pale. When the pastor had finished, he let out a heavy sigh and said, "I always thought that our church was a welcoming place, but perhaps some people have forgotten what it means to follow Christ's teachings." That was the final blow, the complete fall. If before she thought she was going to gain support, now it was clear that she had completely lost the respect of the community. And then, before the service had even started, she got up and left the church. And that was the last time we saw her there. If there was a perfect way to end this story, that's exactly what happened that day. After the pastor had finished reading her messages aloud, the atmosphere in the church became heavy, the kind of silence that only happens when everyone realizes they have witnessed a live disaster. The woman, who had previously sat there full of morals and arrogance, had no choice but to leave with her tail between her legs. She got up without looking at anyone, picked up her bag, and almost ran out the door of the church. And the most satisfying part? No one came after her. The few who believed her bullshit stood there, embarrassed, trying to pretend they had never agreed. And the rest of the church? Well, the rest of the church simply followed the service as if nothing had happened. In other words, she wasn't missed. After the service, some people came up to Daniel and me to apologize. Some admitted that they had had doubts about us before, but after that spectacle they realized how much they had been manipulated. And then came the best part. One of the church members came up to me and said something that made me laugh for days. "Did you hear? After that, she went to another church. But she was expelled from there too. Yes, expelled. It seems that the woman tried to spread the same kind of poison elsewhere, but the new believers had no patience for her crazy antics. It was the true meaning of, she reaped what she sowed. Well, I carried on with my life exactly as before. We continued to go to church without any problems, no funny looks, no ridiculous gossip. In the end, the only person who suffered was the creator of the chaos herself. And honestly, it couldn't have been a better ending. If this story has kept you hooked so far, imagine the next ones. So subscribe to the channel and leave a like so you don't miss any of them. Want more crap like this? We've put together 2 videos you'll love. Click on the card on the screen and we'll see you in the next one.